Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest webinar from the Police Digital Service, the National Enabling Programme. Thanks for coming back to our webinars. We had a little break over summer, and last week we had a really good attendance as we did it live from the NEC at the Emergency Services Show, which kind of just shows how capable this technology is. It was really noisy around us, yet the broadcast still worked really, really well. So the aim of these webinars is to support you in policing in getting the best value out of the 365 suite that's been rolled out across policing, to help you to understand the capabilities, to be inspired to change the way that you do your business, improve the way you work, and so we can showcase some of the work that's already been done by forces and move that forward and show what you can do to benefit the way we work, benefit the communities, and help us tackle crime. One of the important things to remember about the 365 suite across policing is we all share the same blueprint. So we've all got the same technical capabilities underpinning all this work. So if you get an idea or a solution that from any of these webinars, you can then move them in your own force, try them out and deploy them. They should work without any technical builds or extra financial cost to that. And we want you to borrow with pride. Borrow with pride, take an idea and make it your own, but then let us know how you get on with that. It's really important that we're able to understand what value you get out of this. And in a few minutes, we'll paste a link into a feedback form into the chat, so you can give us some feedback and let us know if you've already done something based on the work we've done around the 365 and the webinars moving forwards. As normal, the recording will be made available on the website, hopefully later on today, and it'll also be on the Enabling Centre, and we know lots of people come back and replay them. Questions, it's an interactive session. We want your questions. So you'll see in the sidebar, you can pop your questions in and we'll put them to our guests as we move through the webinar in the next 30 minutes. So if you've got a question or a comment, please start posting them as soon as you've got that, and we will come into them. And if we spot something that we're talking about at that time, we might just bring that in at that very moment. Let's start talking about today. So today we're joined by Inspector Richard Barker from Bedfordshire Police and PC Chris Possil from Cambridgeshire Police, who's in the digital policing team. And they're going to talk through what they've been doing to transform their business around the roads policing. But what I'd ask you to do is bear in mind, anything you see today could be something that you could apply to any department in policing and get some real value out of it. So Chris, while you share your screen, if I pop you onto screen. So what have you been doing in Beds, Herts and Cams that you've been able to do with the benefit of 365?
Hiya, no, thank you, David. Right, so hopefully you can see my screen now. Is that pulling through for everyone?
It is.
Perfect, great. Well, so we've been working on a couple of things really tailored towards road policing. So we've been looking at a couple of proof of concept pieces of work. One around driver's hours checks for HGVs, and the other around management of pursuits. And as you mentioned before, I'm joined by Inspector Richie Barker from the roads policing team, and what we'll do is we'll go through those pieces of work that we've been looking at in our forces and understand what the problem was and what we've done to try and create some efficiencies using the Microsoft Power Platform. So if you're happy, David, I'll step through those couple of pieces of work.
Yeah, and apologies to everybody. Unfortunately, Richard's camera's not working today, so we can't bring him on shot as we normally would, but it's one of those things we'll cope with. And yeah, let's crack into what you've got to show us.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so if my screen's showing there now, I'll probably praise this by saying I work in the IT department, but only recently. I'm a police officer and I'm not an app developer. So everything that you see here is very straightforward. It's very simple and very quick to create. So everything that you see has been done using off-the-shelf Microsoft technology. Nothing special about it, and it's all done in sort of a low-code or no-code way. I mean, you can do some really powerful things using Power Automate, but what we're showing today is really on the simple end of the spectrum, very quick. But hopefully, you'll see as we step through this, that doesn't mean that we're lacking in the benefits that it can bring. So if I step forwards then to driver's hours checks, I'm going to invite Inspector Richie Barker just to kind of outline the problem and talk about what is the problem, what is a driver's hours check, and kind of explain that process and what was the process previous to 365, and then I'll go on and look at what we've developed to help this particular process. So Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Chris. Inspector Richie Barker. I am an operational roads police inspector looking after a team of officers that cover the road network of Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire, and I've been doing so for a few years. One of our many roles is to assist the Department for Transport in stopping and managing heavy goods vehicles. They have a very sort of niche world where obviously the vehicles are under different governance, normal communal garden motor car or motorcycle, and we have the expertise and training to manage that. In one area we're looking at is driver's hours. Most of you will no doubt be aware that a lorry driver can't work and drive 24 hours a day. They're restricted, and we monitor that by doing ad hoc planned or daily routine checks on heavy goods vehicles. And why is that important? Overall, heavy goods vehicles contribute to a significant number of casualties on our roads each year, and fatigue can be an element of that. So monitoring driver's hours is quite key for us. And we support the Department Transport, DVSA, with that, where they do their own checks. When we do support DVSA, we get some money back, not very much. We get a few pounds for every check we do. And the issue up to recently to this software that was introduced to us was we filled out a carbonated A4 sheet of paper for every lorry we stopped, which in itself, not a big ask. But then that carbonated form has to go somewhere, and that information eventually gets supplied longhand to Department for Transport, in which case they can make records of particular operators, drivers, and also we get a few pounds back, which gets ploughed back into supporting the software we use to download the data from the heavy goods vehicle cabs. Quite an onerous task in itself. So when this opportunity came up that we could use this platform for an officer quite simply to get their work telephone and to update an app electronically at the roadside while they're chatting to the driver, downloading the actual raw data, it seemed a win-win. And to sound very enthusiastic about this, a very niche area of ops, it automated it to the point where the data automatically gets sent once a month to Department for Transport. I think one of the few forces in the UK that does that at this moment in time. So there's no human interaction, and the data is part redacted, so they only get the information that they need to see and are allowed to see under information sharing agreements. And so for me, I've cut out, my officers and I have cut out quite a chunk of process, and obviously saved a few pennies on carbonated paper, and it's more efficient. And because it's more efficient, officers tend to be more engaged with doing it, which means we do more checks, which means we get a few more pounds back, which pays for the software that we use. So all in all, I've got to say to Chris and his team, it's much appreciated. This piece of work really has been a real eye-opener and a real positive thing for the roads policing officers on my team.
Brilliant. Thank you, boss. So what we'll do is we'll step through kind of the steps that we've taken to kind of automate that process in the way that Mr. Barker's kind of explained really nicely there. So the very first thing that starts this process is a form, and this is just standard Microsoft Forms. Now, I've created the automation with Power Automate that kind of wires into this. But the beautiful thing about working with Power Platform is that actually I, as the person that have wired in automation behind here, I'm not the person that's created this form. So you can see I'm presenting a couple of screenshots here of that kind of that mechanism for input that officers that stop these vehicles fill in at the roadside or whenever it is they fill them in. I've had nothing to do with this. So this has been created by roads policing, which means that they can ensure that the information that they're capturing at the roadside is exactly as they need it to be. Obviously, I'm showing it here on a phone. It will work on a laptop as well, but it is just standard Microsoft Forms. But from there, we've kind of integrated that form with Power Automate using a couple of really straightforward flows. So what I'm showing here is just a screen grab of the flow that we've created. And to step through the steps that we've got, we'll start at the top here. So all we're doing with this flow in Power Automate is we're looking for a response being submitted. So we're talking about when an officer fills in this form at the roadside, to say that they've stopped a vehicle. We're going to get the details from that form submission, and then we're going to populate an Excel template, and we'll look at the Excel template in a minute. But ultimately, this is really an adaptation of the template that's been provided to us by Highways England, but adapted to work with the automation here. So we populate automatically every time a form is submitted. We populate that Excel template. We also populate a SharePoint list, and I'll go on to talk about that very briefly in a minute. But what we're seeing here, so what the flow I'm showing to you does is it takes the responses from a Microsoft form and it automatically fills in that Excel template, and it fills in a SharePoint list. Okay, so that's what we're showing here on the screen.
And Chris, the important thing with that is, of course, that's almost instant, isn't it? Within a couple of minutes, both those lists and spreadsheets have been filled in by the form.
Absolutely. This isn't a scheduled thing. This runs exactly as you say. This runs the moment the officer presses submit on the form. That triggers the process, that triggers the flow, and immediately it will run. So it's not like it's once every 24 hours. It's straight away. So I mentioned on the previous slide about populating a SharePoint list, and here is a screenshot of that SharePoint list. So obviously we've got a number of officers from across the three forces completing these forms. Now actually it's really useful for supervisory inside of roads policing to get a snapshot of or be able to view a live list of those checks, you know, to get some key stats, you know, how many of those stops are offences identified, you know, which force areas, where are the locations. So this just provides us a space for people that have an interest in this to go and monitor that live list of checks that are coming through based on the content of that form. But this is the Highways England template. So this is really an adaptation, as I said, of the template that was being manually populated before based on those pieces of paper. So all we've done is we kind of repurposed the template that had been provided to us, made it compatible with the automation, so that this, again, you know, in the same way that the SharePoint list is live, this is live as well. So the moment an officer presses submit on that form, a new row is inserted into this Highways England template that we keep up to date. The key difference actually here is that what we're populating in the Highways template here is a cut down version of the information that we capture in the form. There's some information that we capture when we stop a vehicle that we don't share with Highways England because it isn't part of the information sharing agreement. Things like the registration of the vehicle, I think is an example of one of those fields. So actually this allows us to only send to Highways England the information that they're entitled to. So there's no manual redaction required. And then we have another flow. So we've got a flow to populate the Excel template, and then we've got a flow to send this. So on the 7th of every month, all we need to do is ensure that Highways England get a copy of that Excel template, and we do that completely automatically. So you can see in the flow here, I've got a recurrence. So this flow will run every 1 month on the 7th at 11 o'clock, and all it does is very straightforward. It gets the file, so we can see we've got get file metadata, get file content. That's getting that Excel template that's been populated. And we're automatically going to send that email to the email address that we need to submit those monthly returns to. And you can see we can customize the body of that email, say who we're going to send it to, and we've got the attachment there. So what we've got here is a process that, you know, an officer submits a form on their phone at the roadside. That's all they need to do. The rest of the process is completely automated, as Mr. Barker explained, and Highways England on the 7th of every month will get all of the returns that they need in order to give us that financial kickback from doing these stops. And you can see here we've got a screenshot of that email that goes out. I think, Mr. Barker, I think you really kind of covered the majority of it at the beginning, but is there anything else kind of you just want to add before we move on to the next bit in terms of kind of savings of officer time, that sort of thing?
No, I think I've covered it earlier. I mean, I'll just reiterate, it's improved the fact that officers have got an easy, accessible electronic form to complete. Supervisors can monitor, you know, whether officers are stopping lorries and downloading tachograph data, the driver's hours data, and it is all automated. There's no middle person, no administrator managing that transfer of data from the police to the Department for Transport, which is a massive win-win for us. And talking to my contact there, I don't think any other force does that in the way we do it at the moment in time.
So Richard, just on that, obviously the old process, you'd actually have to take somebody off doing operational duties to actually enter the data in the past, wouldn't you?
It would be a police staff member, so we'd have people in our tasking unit who would collate the data from the carbonated forms, fill out essentially an Excel spreadsheet and send that off manually to the Department for Transport.
And what regulations do you have to take into account when using this sort of form and this sort of area of business? There must be a big regulatory framework around the checking of HGVs.
Well, the Road Traffic Act covers our use of stopping any vehicle, including HGVs, and then there's European legislation. Believe it or not, we're still with driver's hours, for us to be able to oblige lorry drivers to provide their driver's hours information, for that working week, that working month. So for us, it is part of our daily business, and it's something that an RP officer, when available, should be doing on a daily basis.
And Chris, there's a question in there about who creates the form, and does this come from a generic account to ensure the data is not lost? But of course, you can have multiple people who are collaborators on the form, but how do you manage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's in terms of who created this form, there's a sergeant in Mr. Barker's team who created the form, and really we encourage. So we've got a number of pieces of work where myself and colleagues in my team will create automation for different teams, but actually we encourage the individual business areas to build the forms themselves, because they are the experts in their world, and they can make sure that they are asking the right questions and with the right nuances, and ultimately all they then need to do is share that form with us, and exactly as you say, collaborate. We can collaborate and then hook in the automation to that. Now, in terms of which account, at the moment, these two pieces of work that we're talking about today were very early proof of concept pieces of work with Power Automate. So the email that goes out to the Highways Agency does come from me, but there is a big conversation around governance of Power Automate and kind of where that's going to go. Do we use shared mailboxes, etc., and that's kind of a bigger, more strategic conversation that's going on at the moment, so we can work that process through. But at the moment, it is tied to my account.
And just for everybody's aware, we have got a webinar coming up about the governance of Power Automations, Power Apps in the next couple of weeks. So look out for that, and they'll be followed by workshops where we can give some further advice. But that's not the only thing. You did trail it at the beginning of this, Chris. So what else have you been doing?
So the second half of this presentation really is around pursuit reporting. And again, I'll invite Mr. Barker just to kind of précis, what is pursuit reporting? Why do we need to capture information, and kind of what the process was prior to this flow coming on.
So vehicle pursuits, bread and butter for police in general, and road policing specifically, because we have particular training to deal with management, the safe management of vehicle pursuits. So I've been a road policing officer on and off since 1997 in a variety of roles and ranks, and they're not going away. But also there's been a lot more management oversight of pursuits over the last 20 years, and so much the College of Policing put together the authorised professional practice, which is available online, which details the fact that we need to hold effective debriefs to review pursuits to improve practice in safe practices. Managing vehicle pursuits. So when I returned to road policing as inspector 3 years ago, we had a process in place which has been running since 1997 when I first became a traffic officer, which is essentially, is a common theme here with the tachograph and driver's hours legislation, fill out a form, fill out a bit of paper. It had moved on to an electronic bit of paper, a Word document that could be stored. But the downside of that is it was quite wordy, to coin a phrase, but also there's very little management data that could be easily gleaned from it. It was very qualitative rather than quantitative. So when this opportunity came up with MS Forms, again, the portability of the way to input some information, i.e. on a work phone immediately after a pursuit, was a benefit. So officers again would be engaged to complete a form. and then we now get management data. So we worked out a question set with the sergeant that built the form with Chris, worked out what I would like to know, what my bosses would like to know, where pursuits are, what pursuits are happening, how it's happening, what we're doing, what tactics we're using, what police officers are involved. And it's built to a point now where there's automation, as Chris will probably allude to in a minute, where I get emails as the Beds, Cams and Hearts pursuit tactical lead about certain pursuits of concern where there's been a collision or where certain tactics have been used. So for me, it's a massive game changer. In the last year, we've had it since April the 1st this year. Before then, I would know about individual pursuits, but not overall patterns, behaviours, officers' behaviours, and I wouldn't know about necessarily the detail across the three forces about patterns of how we're managing pursuits and improving the way we manage pursuits and tactics.
Brilliant. So we'll step through kind of the process then for recording pursuits. So again, this starts with a form, and again, this is not a form that I created. This is one that was created within the Roads Policing Unit, and you know it's just a method to capture all of that information about a pursuit that has occurred. So you know, an officer fills in that form, and then we've got a flow that looks at the information that's come through that, and I'm showing that on the screen, and we can see again this is a flow that is triggered every time one of these forms is submitted. So each time that happens, this flow is going to run. So we can see that we're going to get the response details. So let's have a look at the content. Let's get these responses out of the form. We're gonna go away. We're gonna get a little bit of information about the officer. So when a form is submitted, we get the email address of the user that filled it in, but using the 365 users connector, we can find out kind of, you know, what that officer's role is. You can get a whole bunch of information about them. We're going to populate a SharePoint list again in much the same way as we did with the driver's hours checks. And again, in much the same way, we're going to populate an Excel template. But from there, we notify, we post a message to the Roads Policing Unit Teams channel. So we post that as the Flowbot. And then there's a number of different conditions that, depending on the answers to some of those questions within the form, there's a number of different conditions that do some things. So we can step through and see. We'll ignore the first one for a second, but for example, we can see we're going to let the ANPR team know if there was a pursuit that was triggered from ANPR. If there was a collision that occurred as a result of the pursuit, then that's a condition. If a particular team is involved, that's another condition. If tactical contact is used, again, there's a condition there. Or if Stinger was deployed, then we've got another condition. And all of these different conditions trigger notifications to different departments that might want to know about this pursuit. And the beauty of this is it's entirely automated. So we don't need to rely on an officer remembering to let a particular team know if there was something special about that pursuit. You know, let's say, you know, Stinger was deployed. They don't need to remember to let the person that's in charge of maintaining the Stinger know. It all just happens automatically. And then coming back to this first bit, you know, Mr. Barker was talking about you know, the importance of debriefing a pursuit and making sure that that's done so that we can look at those lessons learned. Now, if an officer outlines in their form that there was no debrief that was carried out yet, then we kick off an approvals process in 365 and include their line manager, because we can go from someone submitting a form in 365, we can use a connector and automatically get their line manager without them having to enter it, which is really neat. And we can ping a Teams message and send an approval saying, okay, you've done a pursuit, but you need to have consider whether it meets the criteria for a debrief now, and they need to action that. So again, a SharePoint list, and this gives supervisory within roads policing a really good view of all of the pursuits that are happening, and they can filter by all the different criteria. They can filter by different forces. They can look at the circumstances or any of those different bits in there. It gives them a really nice view. You can set up different views in here, so you can flick between forces and get a really nice view of all of those returns that have come through. We talked about sending a message as the flow bot. This is really nice because actually we capture a lot of information, but ultimately you might have supervisors and managers within roads policing that just want to get a very quick view on the pursuit that has occurred. So we post a message to the roads policing teams channel with just the circumstances, the suspected reason, and how many people did we stop or detain at the end of it. So it's a very, very small snapshot of that individual pursuit. Okay, and this is just drilling down a bit into some of those conditions. So we talked about, you know, for example, was the pursuit as a result of ANPR, or was there a collision? Then we can see here in the flow some of that detail. You know, if the answer to the question, was the pursuit the result of ANPR, is yes, then we're going to fire this email with these particular bits of information off to that relevant team. You know, and much as we talked about in the driver's hours reporting, we only send the information to those teams that is relevant to those teams. So we don't send them loads of stuff that they have to filter through and pick out the relevant bits. We give them what they need, and the feedback from that has been really good. And that really kind of is the flow. So like I said at the beginning, you know, nothing in here is complicated. This is all really, really straightforward, really, really simple. You don't have to be a developer. I certainly am not, to kind of create these flows, and hopefully you can start to see how you can create some real efficiencies out of some very, very basic off-the-shelf functionality. So that's kind of the end, concludes the pursuits bit. Mr. Barker, was anything you wanted to add just to the end of that?
No, because in the last year we progressed more than we have done in the previous 19 years in pursuit debriefing, recording and management data. It's been really appreciated.
And that's a phenomenal way to end that bit, Richard. Thank you. You know, 365, you can imagine how this could be applied in almost any department, from requesting a piece of uniform to any use of across policing. There's phenomenal potential benefits in doing this. We've had a couple of questions which the team have been busily answering as we go on along there, and it's fantastic to hear that West Yorkshire Police have been using this for drug swipe tests. Again, so that's another very similar way of capturing something at the roadside and processing that data through to give better data, so better decisions can be made. And there was a question there about will this be available in the solutions catalogue, and of course the answer is yes. Our colleagues at BCH have been kind enough to share their approach. We hope to have it up at the end of the month, and you'll be able to get that, and obviously we can highlight that through the communications we do through the enabling centre for forces, and let you know when those are available to download and to access. I don't think we've got many more questions in there. We just got a private question. One thing I will make a point of reminding you is that you do have a team within the NEP who are there to help you to progress these different elements moving forwards. I've just putting on screen now your contacts in the engagement team. So whichever force you're in, there is a dedicated contact. I've got a couple of people on the call with us now. So if you want to know more about this, a solution that's been applied in BCH, or one of the ones from last week with Devon, Cornwall and Dorset, or anything else, please reach out to your colleague in the NEP. Who'll be able to help you to progress it, even if you're not in touch with the right people in the force at the moment, and we can do that forward. And again, we really do want your feedback on these sessions. Now we're just approaching the half-hour mark, so we are going to wrap it up. Next week's webinar, we're going to be looking at how you can use webinars, which sounds a bit complicated, but there is so much capability in the Teams environment. It can be a little bit confusing what sort of meeting to do. We're producing this on what we call a live event, but then we are going to be holding our workshop in the next couple of weeks on the brand new webinar functionality, which allows a registration form to be built. But then we're all very familiar with Teams meetings and potentially big Teams meetings. So what we're going to do is get Nick back from Microsoft and take you through a half hour of what's the differences and when's the best time in policing to use each of the different functionalities as we move forward. So please do give us your feedback, let us know how you're getting on, and we'll be back next Wednesday at 12 o'clock, and see you then. Thanks everybody for joining us today.